The gospel writers Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell us a lot about the last 3 years of Jesus' earthly life. And of course, they tell us a few things about his infancy. But they don't tell us hardly anything about the intervening years between when he was a baby and when he was a full grown adult around the age of 30. There is, however, one singular exception. It's in Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, and it's the gospel reading for this coming Sunday. It's about when Jesus was 12 years old in the temple. Now, this is because this is the only event of this kind that's recorded by any of the gospel writers. This tells us that it's significant, right? It was chosen because this particular incident is going to tell us a lot about who Jesus was, already kind of his self-understanding of who he was and what his mission was. And that's what we find here. We find he's not just 12 years old and so a very precocious child, but that he is full of wisdom, that he is deeply embedded in the words of his father, and that he knows where he needs to be in the house of his father. And for me, most significantly, these first recorded words of Jesus testify from here. We hear a testimony from his own lips that he is, in fact, the Son of God. So we're going to look at this particular text. We're going to see some Old Testament allusions here, and we're going to, by means of working our way verse by verse through it, have a better understanding of exactly who Jesus understood himself to be already at the age of 12. Let's begin with verses 40 through 42. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. They were in Jerusalem for the celebration of the Passover, which of course was one of the 3 annual festivals at which every Israelite male was obligated to attend. Most important of these, or at least the one that was most likely to be attended, was Passover. So not just Joseph, but his whole family goes up to Jerusalem to celebrate this as was their custom. Now, I want you to notice a couple of different things. One, notice how this whole story from verse 40 through 52 is bookended by the reference to Jesus' possession of wisdom. So in the verse we just read, verse 40, it says, the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, which in Greek is Sophia. And verse 52, Jesus increased in wisdom, Sophia, and in stature and in favor with God and man. This is important because in Isaiah 11, we have a description of the Son of David, the anointed one of God, the Messiah, being one who possessed the spirit of wisdom, chokmah in Hebrew. Now, in the Old Testament, wisdom is very often associated with the Word, with Torah. Wisdom and Torah belong together. Well, in Luke 2, how is Jesus expressing his wisdom? By engaging in a Q&A, a discussion with the learned teachers of the day about the Torah. So he shows his wisdom by engaging in this discussion about his Father's word. So he possesses wisdom. He is showing this particular wisdom with the word, and he's doing it at a very young age. So he's only 12 years old. Why is this important? Why is his age mentioned? Well, first of all, it shows us that he's wise beyond his peers, right? No ordinary 12-year-old is supposed to know as much as the boy Jesus does. Now, this, first of all, is not unusual for a future leader, a future king, to be described in the stories about him as having already this kind of precocious wisdom, this wisdom or this understanding, this aptitude at a very early age. We see examples of this in all kinds of literature. We know, for instance, that Josephus, who was a first century Jewish historian, described Moses this way. Josephus says of Moses that his understanding became superior to his age, nay, far beyond that standard. And when he was taught, he discovered greater quickness of apprehension than was usual at his age. And his actions at that time promised greater when he should come to the age of a man. So, more or less, Josephus is saying that Moses was a lot smarter than anybody should have been at his age. Okay? But also notice 12 years old. In writings that Josephus gives us about Samuel, he says that Samuel, when he began to prophesy, was 12 years old. Interesting, huh? Same age that Jesus is in this particular story. It's even more interesting because there are several parallels between Jesus and Samuel. We're going to come to one of those a little bit later in in the video. But suffice it to say, he's young, he's showing wisdom beyond his years, and he's probably on, according to Jewish understandings of the day, on the cusp of adulthood. Now, I say that because we know from a little bit later Jewish document called the Pirkei Avot that it was the age of 13 when Jewish males were considered to be a bar mitzvah, a son of the commandment. That is, at the age of 13, they were officially obligated to keep the commands, the laws, the traditions, the rituals of their fathers. So in Pirkei Avot, Judah ben Tamah used to say that at 5 years of age, the study of Scripture would begin, at 10, the study of Mishnah, and at 13, the Jewish boys would be subject to the commandments. And of course, as you're probably familiar today, a Jewish boy's bar mitzvah is at the age of 13 when he becomes a son of the commandments. So he's on the cusp of adulthood. He's 12 years old. He has this great wisdom, this great understanding of the Torah. Now, let's see how the story unfolds from there. Verse 43. When the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. Now, any parent who's watching this knows what kind of anxiety, what kind of fear must have gripped the hearts of Mary and Joseph when they realized that Jesus was not in this vast caravan of people. We can't fault them because chances are this was not too unusual. There was a large group of people. They would travel in these caravans, these large groups from wherever their hometown was, in the case of Jesus Nazareth, to Jerusalem for these festivals. I mean, it provided community. It was also a lot safer to travel as a group, and they probably just assume, hey, Jesus is with his cousins. He's with his relatives. He's with his friends. Everything is good. They discover, of course, that night that he's not there. So we'll pick up the story from there. Verses 46 and following. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now, first of all, after 3 days, I need to say a couple of things about this. First of all, chances are this does not mean that they were in Jerusalem for a full 3 days looking for him. It probably means that the first day was when they had traveled out of Jerusalem, a day's journey, 20 to 30 miles. The second day is when they traveled back to Jerusalem, that 20 or 30 miles. And then the third day, they were searching in Jerusalem and they found him at the temple. So that's probably what the 3 days is referring to in the temporal sequence. Now, is there a reference to the resurrection here, an allusion to the resurrection, or is this kind of typical idiomatic kind of phrase? Well, first of all, it could just simply be an idiomatic phrase. We know from all over the Old Testament that 3 days or after 3 days or on the third day is a very common time frame by which to describe the sequence of time between the beginning and the ending of something. Or the third day is when something big happens. That's very common in the Old Testament as well. So it could just be a reference to that and nothing more. However, I think that if you look at elsewhere in the Gospel of Luke, this is probably an allusion to the resurrection. What do I mean? Well, if you look at the parable of the prodigal son, when the prodigal son returns, and of course his older brother is all upset because his party's being thrown for his brother, the father says this to the older son. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. There we have the kind of the death and resurrection imagery, right? Then he goes on, he was lost and is found. So notice how in Luke's gospel, being lost is the equivalent of being dead, and being found is the equivalent of being alive again. Jesus was lost from his parents, and now he is found again. So he was, as it were, dead, and now he is alive. This fits with the 3 days, which of course is going to recur at the resurrection, where Jesus is lost, he's dead, he's in the grave, and then after 3 days, he's found, that is, he rises again. So I think that we have a resurrection allusion here to the 3 days, that this event is, as it were, a precursor, a foreshadowing, a literary foreshadowing of that which is to come at the end of the gospel. Okay, Well, where exactly is Jesus? He's in the temple, but when you think of the temple, make sure that you don't think of the temple as just kind of this singular structure, this solitary structure with the holy place and the holy of holies. The temple is kind of like we talk about the church today. When if I tell my wife I'm going to church on Tuesday morning. Well, I might go to the site of the church, but I might never enter the sanctuary. Maybe I'm there to go to the office, or maybe I'm there to go into the fellowship hall, or maybe I'm there to go into the kitchen, or whatever it is. It's part of kind of the campus, if you will, of the church. Kind of like that with the temple. When you went to the temple, chances are, if you were just a typical Israelite, you didn't actually go to the temple itself. That is the temple building. That was just the holy place and the Holy of Holies. You wouldn't go there unless you were a priest. If you were a regular Israelite and you went to the temple, you went into one of the courts. You went to the court of the men or the court of the women, or maybe just into that outer court of the Gentiles. I show you here a picture of the temple as it would have looked back then. Of course, in the middle, you have the temple proper. You have the holy place and the Holy of Holies, and then you have the forecourt of the priest that's out in front of that. But this large open area on either side, that was the court. That was the court where people would gather to maybe to sing, as the early church did. Maybe they gathered there around their rabbi. Maybe they gathered together with friends. There were a lot of reasons for going to the temple. And this is where these rabbis would have gathered, and they would have had people around them for discussion, for dialogue, for debate. Okay? So that's where Jesus is found. He's among all of these learned teachers of the day. And it says that they're amazed, right? They're amazed at his insights. The Greek word that's used here is existemi, and it's used in 3 different places by Luke. Here in verse 47 of Luke 2, all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And then in Luke 8, it's used where it says her parents, that is the parents of the young woman that Jesus raised, were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. And then in Luke 24, this is the Emmaus disciples speaking. They say, moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they didn't find the body of Jesus, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Of course, the irony here is that when they say this, they are talking to Jesus himself about this amazement. So Jesus amazes people throughout the gospel, and we see this amazement then occurring again in Luke 24, connected with the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, well, he's here. He's with these disciples. What's going to happen now as Mary and Joseph, as his mother and father, confront him? Verse 48. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." Yeah, I bet they were in great distress. In fact, if you're wondering exactly what kind of the impact of this Greek word might be, this word for distress, well, it's used in another pretty well-known section of Luke as well to describe another kind of distress. So if you look in Luke chapter 16, verse 24, it says, the rich man, this is the story of the rich man and Lazarus, the rich man called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish, adunomai, in this flame." So that is the same word that's used to describe the anguish or the distress of Mary. So that gives you an insight into just exactly how much she was suffering as they were looking for Jesus. So you can understand exactly why she reproaches Jesus the way that she does. And what is his response? These are his first recorded words. He said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. The first issue before us is how exactly to translate this phrase in Greek, entois to patros mu, which most translations render "in my Father's house." Literally, it is in or among the things of my Father. The King James translated it "about my Father's business. Most of the church fathers translated it as in my Father's house. And it kind of makes sense. Even though it's not explicitly house, it doesn't really make any sense unless Jesus is referring to his location. Otherwise, he'd be saying to Mary and Joseph, why didn't you know that I must be just kind of about these random things in my Father? He wouldn't be giving them any specific reference to where they could find him, in other words. He's saying you should have known where I was. And so I think it's best to understand his words to refer to the fact that he is in his Father's house. Now, he's in his Father's house, but he's also among the things of his Father. That's to say, it's in the Father's house that his holy place is located, his most holy place, his altar, his priests, so on and so forth. The temple is a place where Jesus needs to be. In fact, where he must be in order to fulfill the will of his Father. Now, when he calls God his Father, I think typically what we do is we jump forward to the creeds of the church to this point. So when we think of Jesus being the Son of the Father, we'll think of the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed or something like that, and that's fine. However, I think at the same time we should think of its Old Testament background. What exactly does it mean for the Messiah to call God his Father from a more Old Testament perspective? Well, there's a couple of different ways that this is understood in the Old Testament when God is called Father. One of these is that he's the Father of Israel. Exodus 4:22 talks about that. Isaiah 63:16 talks about that. But God is also called Father in reference to Israel's king. So he is the Yahweh is the Father of the king. In Psalm 89, verses 26 and 27 are a description of that. So in the Old Testament, when God is described as Father, ordinarily he's referred to as the Father either of the nation of Israel or specifically the King of Israel. Now, Jesus, of course, is the fulfillment of both of these because he is Israel reduced down to one man. He is the true Israel, the true Israelite who comes to fulfill the laws for Israel and to retrace the steps of Israel in his own exile. But he's also, of course, the King. He is the anointed one of God. He is the King of kings. He is the Son of David. So from an Old Testament perspective, being called the Son of the Father means that Jesus is true Israel and the true Son of David. But of course, he's that, and he's even more, because of course he is also homoousios. He's of one essence with the Father, of one nature with the Father. And you might say vocationally, he exhibits this as being the true Israelite and as being the true King of kings, the true Son of David. Now, you also can't miss the contrast here between what Mary says and between Jesus' response. Mary says, "Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." But notice how Jesus responds. "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Mary talks about Joseph as father. Jesus, you might say, softly corrects her and says, I'm at my Father's house. So here you see that Jesus is giving voice to the fact that, yes, he is the son of Mary and Joseph. Joseph is his foster father, if you will. He's the one whom God appointed to raise him. But Jesus also knows that he is much more than one who is under the foster father Joseph, that he is in fact the son of his father, that he is the Son of God. And as I said earlier, in these first recorded words of Jesus, he confesses that he is in fact not just a man, but that he is in fact the Son of God. And notice too that Jesus, from the very beginning, is misunderstood. Misunderstood here by his own mother and foster father, and misunderstood by many others throughout his ministry. So if you look at this Greek verb suneemi, which is the word for understand, Luke uses it 4 different times. He uses it here for Mary and Joseph not understanding. In chapter 8, verse 10, the parables are told so that hearing they may not understand. Then chapter 18, Jesus explicitly prophesies that he's going to be arrested and crucified and resurrected, but it says that they understood none of these things. And then finally, the Emmaus disciples understand the scriptures when Jesus opens their minds to do so. So the only way in which people truly understand who Jesus is by a divine act. Jesus opens their mind to understand the scriptures, and then they understand who he is. But there's always this element about people, this way in which people don't really get who Jesus is until after his death, after his resurrection, and then through the work of the Spirit, their eyes being open to understand and to see who Jesus truly is. Now, how does Mary respond to all this? Well, let's wrap up with verses 51 and 52. It says, he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with man. Now, there's two Old Testament allusions that are packed into these verses. One of these is that his mother treasuring up all these things in her heart is closely parallel to Genesis 37:11. It says that the brothers of Joseph were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now, in the Greek translation, the Septuagint, that kept the saying in mind is almost exactly the same words that we have in Luke chapter 2. So Mary treasured up all these things in her heart, and the father of Joseph treasured up all of these sayings in his heart and mind as he thought about what Joseph's dreams might mean for the future. That's the first Old Testament allusion. The second is that Jesus increasing in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man, that closely parallels 1 Samuel chapter 2, where the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. So Jesus is pictured here as sort of a new Samuel. He's the one whom the Lord has called. His mother is sort of like Hannah. They are both women who should not have conceived, but through divine intervention they did. They both have their song. Hannah has her song, and then Mary has her Magnificat. And Samuel, according to Josephus, began prophesying at the age of 12. Jesus is showing this precocious wisdom at the age of 12. And then they're both described similarly as growing in stature and in favor with God and with man. So that is a look at the last part of Luke chapter 2, the gospel reading for this coming Sunday. It is a great example of how Luke uses this particular story to show us who the Messiah is, that his place is in Jerusalem, that his place is at the temple, and that he knows already here at the age of 12 that he's the Son of the Father, and he knows that his destiny, his God-given destiny, is in Jerusalem, where at this final Passover, he will give his own life as the Passover lamb, and he will bring to fulfillment the Torah of his father, the Torah that he already knew so well at the age of 12. I hope that you all had a wonderful Christmas. I hope that you have a very blessed and happy New Year, and I pray God's peace upon each and every one of you. Thank you for watching.